CJ Stroud, drafted by the Texans, in case you guys weren't paying attention this weekend. But as we know, every rookie quarterback is going to take some lumps, and every quarterback needs as much support as he can get. I think that, like Pat Mahomes is a perfect example of the kid that went to the perfect situation. I mean, he was probably going to be good no matter where he went, but would he have been quite as good as he is right now without Andy Reid's influence? Who knows? But and it occurred to me today that despite talking about it quite a bit over the last couple months, that I did play with a quarterback in David Carr who probably wasn't handled the right way. And I don't know if that ultimately would have made the difference if David Carr had gone to a different situation. If he might have been one of those guys that might have been better off if he'd been drafted in the second round overall. But he went to an expansion team where circumstances were really not ideal. And I think made even worse by a couple of mishandlings. And to be clear, I have very, very great respect for a lot of the people that were there early with the Texans, but I think they just made a couple of mistakes. And some things were beyond their control that created bad circumstances. But if we were going to look at the things the Texans could do better than they did for David Carr and better than they did for Deshaun Watson. Deshaun was successful his rookie year, but there's always things you can do better. And I think maybe particularly with Deshaun in his first couple of years, they could have done better. So with David, I mean, sacked 76 times his rookie season. I guess he didn't lead the league in sacks the next season, but then he led the league in sacks or times being sacked in his third and fourth season. So we almost got a little bit better there in 2003. We were right on track. But I would say first and foremost, just like the thumbnail said, in David Carr in 2002, there were 6 rookies starting on offense. I mean, it was absurd. 6 rookies. Like, I still don't get that. They wanted, now Ryan Young was supposed to be one of the tackles and he was injured. So that's something they couldn't quite plan for. But you had 6 rookies, and some of whom would go on to be good. Chester Pitts would go on to be a very, very good football player, but he was a rookie. Jonathan Wells was a rookie. There were rookies all over the place, particularly on the offensive line. So I think that they are better set up right now in terms of offensive support than David Carr was, certainly. Like, I love Billy Miller, but Dalton Schultz is a much more accomplished tight end than Billy Miller was at the time. The wide receiving core might be the one spot where perhaps they can still try to do something better. I love that they added Tank Dell. I think that John Mechie, assuming he comes back, is going to have a good opportunity. Robert Woods will be very, very good, but they could still do more there. And then the center position, obviously, is the other one big one. I saw a little tidbit today. Brandon H. forwarded this from one draft person who'd been talking 6 weeks ago about how Juice Scruggs, the eventual draft pick by the Texans in the second round, was a lot more highly respected inside NFL circles than the media had really caught on to. So as we were all kind of wondering, like, why did they trade up for Juice Scruggs necessarily? It seems like, John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt or whatever his name is there would have been a much better option, or any of the other guys, the one of whom ended up getting drafted very late. But for whatever it's worth, there was buzz about him, perhaps more so than the rest of the media was talking. I know PFF had him rated a little bit higher too. As armchair GM quarterback coach says, did the Texans have a choice at the time? This is the other thing. So if we go to what could they do differently for David than they did for us with the Texans? You're right. The expansion team, it was going to be really tough to get a whole lot of support around David Carr. They'd made the rules a lot tougher than it was for the Panthers or the Jaguars, because the Panthers and the Jaguars ended up in the championship games. This is their second year in existence and had all kinds of space to spend. So they made it a little bit tougher. But yeah, I do think they could have been a little bit more judicious in perhaps the types of guys they went after if they were going to draft a rookie quarterback. Dom had success in Carolina as an expansion team, having a really good defense with veteran players on defense while they started a rookie in the kid from Penn State there. Damn it. So so eventually, like, it worked for them, but by the time the Texans came around, it just wasn't the right situation. So they could have done better. I think that the key is that right now they're in a much better spot for CJ Stroud. You've got two solid tackles at least. You've got a right guard who can start on a lot of teams. You've got a left guard, hopefully, that's going to play more like what you expected him to. And then the center is the big question mark there. So you've still got a way better offensive line. I also think that the offensive line for Deshaun Watson, if you'll recall, Mike Meltzer made this point well. He used to push against me a little bit when I would talk about how insane it was that Deshaun Watson didn't start week one. That offensive line that Tom Savage went out and started for it in that first week of 2017 with Kendall Lamb, who was just, he wasn't ready to be starting at left tackle. Dwayne Brown had held out. So again, it wasn't the Texans' fault that part of it necessarily, but you got to do better than that. You can't have CJ Stroud out there playing behind a ragtag offensive line. As far as the offensive scheme, the two guys, David Carr and Deshaun Watson. Kerry Collins was the name that just came to me. So as far as the two guys, the two previous guys, David Carr was playing in a Chris Palmer offense, and Chris Palmer had been very successful in multiple stays in the NFL. But I just knew from Mark Brunell running Chris Palmer's offense in Jacksonville that it's a really, really hard offense for any quarterback to grasp. Mark used to talk about the complexity and the difficulty of it just because there are a lot of option routes. Like at any given time, you've got multiple receivers with multiple different options based on what the coverages are. So you start going through your mind, the 5 eligible receivers each have 3 different options, all the different combinations and permutations of routes that could be. It's a lot. And when you heap that onto a young player, it's not so easy to figure out. Deshaun Watson, I think Bill O'Brien did a good job in Deshaun's rookie year of incorporating some of the Clemson stuff. And he was very productive. I think O'Brien did a good job of simplifying it as much as he needed to simplify it. I think ultimately over the first couple of years, I felt like O'Brien got away from that too much. Remember the first play of the first game of 2018, Deshaun, I believe it was the first play. Deshaun fumbled on what might have been a zone read, and it felt like the Texans never ran a legitimate zone read after that again. Because, NFL coaches, they are paranoid about screwing things up. They'd rather run plays perfectly and get beat by 7 than, God forbid, you do anything risky, or a lot of people are like that. So I think with the scheme in Bobby Slowick, it's too easy to say, hey, look at what they did with Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy had some familiarity with that scheme, and the 49ers simply have a better offensive personnel grouping right now. But I think that Bobby Slowick was integral in getting Brock Purdy up to speed, having him take advantage of that personnel they did. And you can't expect CJ Stroud to have that same kind of success as Brock Purdy, but I think you can get him indoctrinated into this scheme. CJ is very, very adamant about paying attention to detail. And that's something that, my experience with Gary Kubiak is that's one of the things that makes him special is the attention to detail. Kyle Shanahan, same way. When you run that scheme, the Kubshanistan scheme, you've got to very much pay close attention to detail, because the fakes, the execution, everything, every pass looking like a run, every run looking like a pass, you have to do that. They have the template in place. It's just a matter of whether Bobby Slowick is good enough or not to do it. So supporting cast, I think that we'll be better off in terms of offensive line. We're not going to be better off in terms of receiving. I mean, as of right now, there is no DeAndre Hopkins in his prime, but that's we can work on that perhaps. A defense. Okay. I will, as a member of the defense of that 2002 squad, I do think that we actually did as good a job as you could expect, given the amount of time we were on the field. So the Pittsburgh game that we won was one of the weirdest games I've ever played in. The time of possession was like 45 minutes in favor of Pittsburgh, And somehow we won because we caused 3 turnovers for scores. I think Aaron Glenn had 2 of them. Aaron Glenn had a punt return for a score and then 2 other turnovers for scores. It was a weird game, but it was like that. And as the season went on, the defense started to wear down. So it just got worse and worse and worse. But I felt like we did a pretty good job on that. I think the test for D'Amico, obviously, is taking a defense that was amongst the worst in yards per carry, amongst the worst in yards per play, all of these things where the Texans defense was just really bad. Like, how quickly can D'Amico turn that around? I think that it was, I'm not forgetting Tank Dell, everybody. Tank will be very good and helpful and explosive, but he's a rookie also. So I'm trying not to put too much on Tank Dell's plate. So as far as the defense, can D'Amico turn this defense around in one season? I think he can do a lot. I think that the thing I worry about the most is taking D'Amico from linebackers coach to defensive coordinator to head coach. He's not going to, you can't expect him to have the same influence on the linebackers that he obviously did as a linebackers coach or as a defensive coordinator. Because he took Greenlaw and Fred Warner, mid-round draft picks, and turned them into genuine studs. And credit to them too. But he turned those guys into studs. I've seen this now, though, with various, Mike Munchak. I thought he was the best offensive line coach of a generation. When he became a head coach, the Tennessee Titans offensive line wasn't as good. Mike Vrabel, I thought he was an awesome linebackers coach. When he became coordinator and then on to a head coach, I don't think he's done. He did some good things for Zach Cunningham this year in Tennessee. But that's the big challenge. That's the big test. So D'Amico, as a defensive-minded head coach, the best thing he can do for C.J. Stroud is help Bobby Slowick, help CJ, but then really give him a defense as well. Okay. Knowledgeable backup as a mentor. I think this is something that the Texans might be doing really well this year compared to what David Carr had. David Carr had Tony Banks, and I like Tony Banks a lot too, and I think Tony Banks is a really smart quarterback, but he wasn't necessarily – it's not the same as having a guy that's kind of steeped in the scheme of the offensive coordinator. So I think there was only so much that Tony could really do. And then I think another thing they did with David Carr, I can remember Tony telling me that like he was specifically supposed to treat David Carr with kid gloves, just and maybe the coaches just went overboard in trying to explain it, but there was to be no hazing of David Carr, which is fine because there wasn't really, like, by that era in 2002, there wasn't a whole lot of hazing anyway. But it was between, I think, Tony not necessarily being able to help David, or at least being just told to pump the brakes on helping him, and then just various things like when the rookies were supposed to get up and sing, David didn't do it. Like things like that, little things that were just. When CJ talks about having humility and stepping in and needing to earn respect and everything, I just get a sense that he spent more time thinking about it. I know Ryan Day has talked about it, and I think he might just be a little bit more of a natural leader than David. And I think David, for a lot of reasons, either because of his natural inborn leading ability or just because they didn't really push that part of it as much, I think he was a step behind in a lot of ways. And the other thing, too, is just in having a quarterback like Case Keenum, who's familiar with and knows and has played in this scheme. And it was as a young quarterback, I think, even though he played forever, Case was coming from a scheme that was much more remedial in terms of the things you need to know to play in the NFL. CJ is coming from a much more pro-ready, pro-adaptable scheme. So having both Davis Mills, who's got some experience, but I think really Case Keenum more than anything, and Case Keenum's familiarity with this, Case Keenum's maturity, Case Keenum having had to learn a whole lot. Like Case had some bad habits when he came into the league, and he got away with it for a few games, remember? But just some of the things like, scrambling out the back of the pocket, some of the throws he would make, these jump throws that he would try to make. He did a lot of things that he got away with at U of H that he couldn't get away with the NFL. And he had to learn how to stamp all that out of his game. And it really is a testament to Case and how hard he worked that there was a big level of skepticism from people around the league about just what Case Keenum could do in the NFL. And he's had some really good moments. I think he can be a really good asset for CJ Stroud. As far as Deshaun, I mean, the part I would say about Deshaun that I really wish they'd done differently, and who knows, I don't think it would have prevented whatever he decided to do during COVID or how he handled his massage situations. But in terms of that first training camp, you only get so many reps in a modern NFL training camp. There are only so many reps to go around. So you really can't, you can't have the guy be your backup the whole camp and then all of a sudden throw him in the first week of the season. And then by the time, remember what happened? Tom Savage got sacked 400 times in the first half. So Deshaun goes in and plays really well. They scrape by, but then they go to that Cincinnati game and the Texans beat Cincinnati, but they couldn't run a full offense. Deshaun wasn't ready for it. So you might have these notions that, hey, we want to give him as much time as possible, so we're not going to put pressure on him. The problem then becomes, all right, but he's not getting meaningful reps during training camp. He's not working with the number one receivers. I think CJ, if he doesn't start game one, I think he still needs to be prepared to start game one, and that means him getting the lion's share of the reps, which again, that it helps a lot that Case Keenum is already familiar with this offense, or at least offenses like this, and can step in there and perhaps won't get as many reps as ideally he would if he does end up starting week one, but it's not going to be a disaster. So I like that. I think they're doing that part of it well. As far as the indoctrination, the one last thing I would say is that there are some little things that I hope the Texans are better at this than they were with David Carr and Deshaun Watson. David Carr tipped his snap count a lot early in his rookie year, maybe his whole rookie year. Some of the defensive linemen tried to tell him it and tried to tell the offensive coaches. They did not listen. They did not heed our attention because some offensive coaches think that defensive players are idiots, which may be true. But you stick me, I might be an idiot, but you stick me stick me in a prison. I got enough time to think about it. I'll figure out how to get out eventually. Probably just by beating somebody up, but ingenious nonetheless. When it comes to defensive linemen, they're telling you, hey, we can tell what plays are coming. There's another thing that would happen. With that early offense. They'd be so predictable. We'd be in practice. I could tell by the stance or the formation or whatever what play was coming. I'd blow the play up, and the offensive line coach would accuse us of reading the practice script and knowing what play was coming that way. We'd explain to him why we knew what play was coming. And they'll, okay. Hey, David's tipping his snap count. Might want to worry about that before we go play San Diego and Junior Seau. It's just maddening. So I don't think you have to worry about that with this crew. This crew, especially because of D'Amico. D'Amico is a master of understanding and picking up on tendencies. Everybody's gotten a lot more advanced than this these days. Teams have crews or people specifically looking for their own tells, like doing self-scouting. So we'll have that. With Deshaun Watson, I think there was a level of predictability with Bill O'Brien's offense as well that teams picked up on. I mean, when they played in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, I went back through because I could tell about halfway through the game, all right, they figured something out. I went back through, and every single time that the Steelers blitzed versus the Texans run, the blitzer, and this was a lot of DB blitzes, the DB blitzer didn't pay attention to the quarterback at all. He went straight for the running back. Not a thought in his mind that he was going to go after the quarterback because of whatever they'd picked up on. So this is where I am encouraged too. Slowick, Shanahan, these guys understand that stuff, and I think they're going to be a lot better for CJ. So as far as the whole reason that I started thinking about this at all was I'd kind of stumbled onto some David Carr stuff on NFL Network. I'm going to show two clips of David Carr. First this is David Carr talking on NFL Network just about the pick of these two guys in general.
Yeah, I love this because D'Amico has both
Anderson and CJ Stroud.
Came from a place in San Francisco where they had a great edge rusher, and so you knew you kind of had to get that, right? So was it going to be, at the expense of not getting a quarterback? Well, great, they got to do both. They got to get CJ and they got to go up, and they had 22 or 23 picks in the next 2 years. I was talking to Mooch the other day. He's like 22 or 23 first and second year guys can't make the team, Dave. Like, you got to get rid of some of those picks and get some people for them, and they did a fantastic job, I think, of grabbing that pass rusher that can end games for you. You get a quarterback that can win games for you. They're in a great position. They are a little bit farther away than Indy or maybe some of the teams in that division. But I think you start at that core, right? You got two guys that you can kind of hang your hat on. You got pictures of them together. They've known each other since high school. A lot of times in locker rooms, the offense and the defensive guys, they don't necessarily interact a lot, right? You practice against each other, then you go your separate ways. But having those two, having known each other and have history together, I think that does something early on for a young quarterback, a young defensive player, and a young coach that's trying to develop some type of, identity in your locker room. You get two guys that have some history together. That's a great start.
Okay, so I actually thought he made a couple good points there. One about the picks. I think that's I'm not overly worried about what national reception is to the aggression or anything. I'm halfway okay with saying that the trade up for Anderson was basically like a trade up for Stroud. I feel like it was a trade up for the package because you have to take Stroud second. You take Anderson third, but that cheapened the deal to get down to trade up to number 3. But it gets very, very complicated. I don't buy it completely, but I do approve of it because the Texans had all those picks. They were aggressive in going up and getting a top 5 guy, which is really hard to add to your team. But they are also in good shape for next year. They still have more high picks, and they look more like a normal team. It's not like all of a sudden, it's not like when they traded for Deshaun Watson. It wasn't like when they traded for Laramie Tunsil and all of a sudden you don't have first round picks for the next 2 or 3 seasons. So I'm not worried about that. As far as offensive and defensive guys not hanging out together, that is an interesting dynamic. A lot of it, I think, sometimes boils down to just like a couple of guys on your team. Like I think it used to be different back in the day. Oh man. Who told me this story? Oh, an old quarterback. Was telling his story about like back in the day when it was and I wrote it down. I can't Dan Pastorini. That's right. It was Dan. Dan Pastorini was telling me a story about this defensive lineman. He didn't want to say his name because his defensive lineman turned into a gentle giant later in life. It wasn't either of the Hall of Famers, but he said he was terrified of this guy. Like, Dan would walk into the locker room and like try not to make eye contact with him. And that this defensive lineman would just sit at his locker, like glaring at the offensive players. And then they'd go out to practice and everybody would try to kill each other, and like that used to be the attitude. That's how Buddy Ryan came to punch Kevin Gilbride. Like that was an extreme degree, but that Buddy Ryan bred a lot of animosity for the offense. But you don't have that quite as much anymore. And guys, I think in general tend to be tighter and looser about all that stuff, probably because of free agency and video games and softness. They're not hard. They're not hard and tough the way we were back when any of you were like, growing up. Everybody's how it goes every year. As far as, the last thing he'd said was those guys knowing each other, CJ Stroud and Anderson knowing each other. I like that. I think Sean made this point, or maybe one of you guys did, was that it was, I think maybe you saw a little bit of a looser version of CJ Stroud, not just because this whole process is over and this weight is off his shoulders, but it was kind of cool for him to have a guy that he knows and really likes alongside him the entire time, like right from the jump. He got drafted, he turned around, and all of a sudden he had another teammate on the team right there that he already knew. So I am excited about that since they both do seem to be wired a certain way. CJ is very conscientious about leadership, and I think that Anderson is very conscientious about it and also just more of a naturally charismatic, I think probably, extroverted leader. So I like that those two guys are going to be they're like the right kind of energy, but not overbearing with it. And you can just tell by the way things talk, the way they talk about Anderson, he just does everything the right way. So I don't honestly anticipate Anderson being like an 18 sack a year type of guy. But he doesn't need to be. He really doesn't need to. He just needs to be part of a core and a really good football player. Don't get me wrong, but he's got to be a core of guys that lead this defense to end up being something really, really good. And then this was just a quick snippet of David at CJ Stroud's pro day. When remember, at pro day a few weeks ago, CJ Stroud was totally 100%, no doubt about it, going to Carolina because Josh McCown had asked him to play a game of horse.
I'm watching the Panthers coaches. I know Josh McCown, I know Frank Reich. I'm like, they kind of head nod when you make a nice throw down the field. Did you have a good meeting with them last night? The owner was in town. Everyone got to meet you. So you going to sign up with Carolina? Is that were we already there, or what's happening?
Nah, man. I mean, I appreciate them coming out and spending time with me. Definitely meant a lot. Definitely had a great conversation. Didn't even talk X's and O's. Just really talked about not only just who I was as a person, but my faith. And we'll see what happens, man. But it's not in my control. I can just let God do his thing and do what I do on the field.
It was, as far as that goes, that was just a nice exchange between them. I think David was very impressed with CJ Stroud, the person. I feel like a lot of people, because he's not, I don't think he's not a natural extrovert. You see him very loose around Bryce Young and all those guys, that I think sometimes, people jump to conclusions. Sometimes football coaches and scouts jump to conclusions way too fast about people's personalities, when in fact, like the guys that are nice to be around day in and day out for 6 months while you play football tend to be guys that maybe are a little bit quieter, unless you're genuinely funny. If you're genuinely funny and also really, really good at football, you can get away with just about anything. Like Shannon Sharpe. Shannon Sharpe is genuinely funny and genuinely awesome at football. So he could be allowed all day long and people are going to be cool about it. As far as the snap count stuff, I'll tell you what, Adam, Gary Walker, I'm going to have to call Gary and ask him to take me through it again, because Gary was the one, as a nose tackle, I couldn't really see it because it was David. David would drop either his hands or his hips like right before the snap count. So if it was on 1, he would drop it right before. If it was on 2, he wouldn't drop, and then on 2, he would drop right before. It was either his hand or like a little something minuscule that you could see from the defensive end position, but not necessarily nose tackle. So they told him, but it just wasn't. I don't know. Quarterbacks got a lot going on in their minds, and I don't know, man. I don't know. Let's see. I better get going. I'll do this one tomorrow. I was going to do Shannon Sharpe. Now let's do this. Let's just relive this magic of. This is when it all started. About a month ago, Peter King wrote in his column that he thinks there's a 10% chance the Texans might not take a quarterback. And to Peter King's credit, I think he presented it as opinion. He said just talking to people around the league that told him they wouldn't be surprised if Nick didn't take a quarterback because of his conservative nature or whatever. He wouldn't press for a quarterback. So he said he was still 90%, he may have said 95% convinced that the Texans were going to take a quarterback. But that's what started it rolling. I think it's what got people thinking. And this was Shannon Sharpe. I wanted to go back and watch Shannon Sharpe, about 30 seconds of him flipping out on the Texans for not taking a quarterback in the draft, which was still a month away, and then see how he ended up handling it after the Texans did take a quarterback.
Looked great, man. You look great. So as you go forward, I'll just tell you what I told Derek. Now you're getting ready to go play.
Oh, yeah. Here's his last bit of advice to CJ.
NFL, not just going out there to try and show that you belong there, because you absolutely belong there. Based on what I saw today, you absolutely belong. You rip it. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch you, man. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
You got it, man.
And don't start 6 guys on offense. Okay, so here's Shannon Sharpe. This was on April 4th. My God, less than a month ago.
Hi, Shannon. Would this be the right move or the wrong move for
the Texans? So the Texans passing on a quarterback, according to a suspicion that Peter King said had a 10% chance of happening. Would that be the right move or the wrong move?
Wrong move. Not having a quarterback isn't conservative. It's stupid. Skip, they make it. I can see, Skip, if this was like last year, Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett was, he was only one quarterback that was rated in the first round. Yep. And he went 20th. You got to go way back. This is the first time a quarterback came outside of the top 10. In 2013, E.J. Manuel was 16th. Geno Smith was 39th. So let me ask you this. Let's just say for the sake of argument. Myles Garrett, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, all in the draft. You think Myles Garrett going over, and all these guys are coming out, and just as they were rated coming out, you think Myles Garrett going over any one of them? Absolutely not. You always take the guy that can produce the points, because that's how you win.
Yeah.
So I can see, Skip, if all these quarterbacks, if Will Anderson, but I'm not taking Will Anderson over Bryce Young. I'm not. Because they, well, you can take Will Anderson and then you got those first-round picks you can trade back. How dumb would that be? You take the quarterback.
Look at that skip right there. And then he went out to say, like, Nick Caserio was on thin ice. He really got, like, besides himself. It was like 7 minutes long, and I didn't want to play all of that again. But he started getting actually angry with Nick Caserio for doing something that he hadn't yet not done yet. He hadn't yet not taken a quarterback, but he was livid with him. And mentioned, firing David Culley after 1 year and Lovie Smith after 1 year.
They needed two things.
Okay, so this is the grade that he gave him. So I just wanted to be sure that Shannon, if he was consistent enough in saying that they had to take a quarterback, then damn it, they better have given him an A in this draft.
They got both. They got a quarterback, didn't have to do anything. And the Deshaun Watson is paying dividends for him again because they were able to parlay some of those picks that they got from Deshaun and turning into Will Anderson Jr. So I like what they did, Skip. And plus, you got to have a quarterback that will be able to compete with Trevor Lawrence. And you need somebody to go put his butt on the ground. And you also need somebody to go put Anthony Richardson's butt on the ground.
And Bryce Young.
I like the deal.
Okay.
I like what they did.
So you give them
I give him an A.
Solid A.
I give him a solid A.
Skip would go on to give them a B. Like the scoundrel that he is. He didn't like the price they paid to go up and get Will Anderson. I think that I get that from afar or from a close. There are a lot of Texans fans that I don't know. How many of you are there that really are upset that they gave that much up to go up and get, whether if you're saying that it was to actually go up and get Stroud because they would have preferred Anderson or whatever. Here's my thinking on that. I'm okay with them trading up to get the package of 2 top 5 guys. The logic breaks down a little bit if you say that their favorite player was Anderson and they had to take him no matter what, and they wanted Stroud, but, they would take Stroud first so that the price at number 3 to trade up to number 3 wouldn't be as high. I understand that part of the logic, but here's where that breaks down. If you've established that you thought that CJ Stroud was good enough to trade up to number 3 overall, at least, right? With that logic. Okay, then that means that you have a quarterback that you think is a top 3 quarterback. By definition, that quarterback is way more valuable than Anderson, an edge rusher. Like, he just is. Like, if you think he's like, so that's why it's got to be a package. It can't just be like, oh no, they were just trading up there to get Stroud. You traded up there. He's a quarterback that's worth a top 3 pick. That's more valuable in your mind, in your estimation, and for what he can do for your team than what Anderson can. So I meet you halfway there. I don't think I'm compromising. I think it is a nice way to get a package with a very young core of guys that are going to make a combined $70 million guaranteed over the next couple of years. That's the other big thing. That's the other thing I like about it. The maturity level. I think that you just cannot ignore anymore that, and I mean, we know this going back to the old CBA and Jamarcus Russell and Ryan Leaf and all of those guys. Teams have just gotten more and more careful about who they give a boatload of guaranteed money to. And like, there's the team building side of it where, yeah, hell yeah, you want good, mature leaders to help your team be great. But you also, sometimes that money can damage a guy. Now, the guys anywhere in the first round, they're going to make a lot of money. But it's just that much more important, I think, that you weigh character into that. These guys, both CJ Stroud and Will Anderson. I think it's very clear that they're motivated by more than just money. And that's not always easy. That's not always that easy to tell because everybody says the damn right thing anymore. So, there's a couple of grades in here that I wanted to share as well. Let's get this rolling again. The Pro Football Focus ones, just because they tend to do pretty in-depth grades. So I wanted to check that out and see. Let's see. Day 1, after lots of speculation that they would pass on a signal caller, the Texans ultimately select the 2nd-ranked quarterback on the PFF big board. Stroud earned a 92.2 grade. He was the 7th highest graded player at the position this last season. So I like the PFF grades when you're looking at college guys for pass rushers. And okay. Mea culpa time. Two things I was wrong about. I've already admitted that I was wrong about Lamar Jackson, definitely 100% beyond a doubt needing an agent. He was agentless like a fox and waited for Jalen. Basically, Jalen Hurts' agent did all of the work for him. If he had been holding out for 230 guaranteed, then he should have gone and hired David Mulligetta. But it's like he ended up getting a good enough deal. It was probably more drama than a lot of people wanted. So I was wrong on that. And also, I switched my opinion right at the end, right before the draft, and said that I would prefer Anderson over Tyree Wilson. But I can't claim complete credit for it because I really I was thinking more short-term. I was short-sighted. And Tyree Wilson was the guy that I thought his skills more immediately transferred to the NFL and could spell big production early on. Whereas I think with Anderson, there's some work he needs to do in his style of play. But after talking to and listening to people from Alabama, and after going through the draft weekend, I 100% get the character and leadership side of it. I also am very, very excited about everything that the reason I flipped the day of the draft was because of the foot issue that Tyree Wilson has, that it might be more complicated. And I'm scared off after Kevin Johnson and Matt Schaub and other people who have had Liz Frank injuries and then had any kind of complication. Kevin Johnson having the screws taken in and out of his foot. I don't want any more of that. And that was tiny little Kevin Johnson running around on a Bryce Young frame, and his foot couldn't handle it. So, but I still thought I still preferred Tyree Wilson, the football player. I think when it comes to the complete and total package now, I 100% get why they wanted Will Anderson. So I was wrong about that because I also thought that D'Amico might prefer Tyree Wilson. The other thing about it is that from what D'Amico and Anderson have said about the way they plan to use him, where he's gonna be a wide 9 defensive end, where a lot of the times he's just going to be a cocked out wide in a 3-point stance. Doesn't likely have to worry about a whole lot of coverage responsibilities or anything. Nick on Saturday was talking about it with the 4th round pick there out of TCU, and it was it's going to be kind of just caveman style football for a while for those guys. They're just going to let them play fast, know what they're doing, and just try to get up into the offensive tackle. So I'm excited about that for them. Let's see. They continued on. Let me pause this. The day 2, Scruggs comes off the board before Ohio State's Luke Whippler after producing 67.5, blah, 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 grades. So Scruggs is growing on me. I've watched a little bit more of him. And the thing about Scruggs is, for one, he's got a great story. Great for us as readers of the story. Probably not that much fun for him. He got in a car accident and broke his back and ended up missing an entire season, came back and played half of the next season. And in a lot of ways, I think they see upside in him and that he was still recovering from that back injury in a lot of ways. Now, I don't want to Tracy McGrady this guy or anything. We don't need somebody with continual back issues, but it seems like it was an orthopedic injury, not anything like a chronic back condition. Obviously, it was from a car accident. And he gets very, very high marks on all the competitiveness, nastiness, all those things that, frankly, really good centers are as nasty as they are athletic. I think Chris Myers when he was really, really good, he was undersized, but he was scrappy as hell. Scruggs is not undersized. Scruggs is he's a good size center. He's 305, but not overly athletic. So when you watch him, you got to project him into trying to figure out, okay, how is he going to work in this scheme? How is he going to use his hands, use his leverage, all those things? And they seem to feel pretty good about him. So there's also noise if you're just joining. There was noise before the draft from a couple of draft nicks about how Scruggs was a guy who was getting a lot of buzz from people in the NFL, but not necessarily in the media yet. So when you ask why did Nick take him so early when there are other centers available, it very well might just be that a lot of teams, had Scruggs ranked higher than what the mock drafts would show. And that's stuff we never really know. And, I think these guys got to trust their judgment. And even if they don't know through the grapevine or anything that other people are interested, they might just by monitoring visits and all those other things get a feel for that kind of stuff. So I'm okay with it. Especially, look, if he ends up being a starter for the team and plays well, then I'm super okay with it. Day 3, my poor old man eyes are not going to be able to read that. Let me get this. Okay. Houston traded down twice to kick off the day and still land a solid prospect at a position of need. And Horton, the defensive end, is set to develop along number 3 overall pick, Will Anderson Jr. I am excited about Horton. Horton is new to defensive end. In a lot of ways, he's a little bit like Will Anderson, where Will Anderson played from a 2-point stance, played linebacker, came down and played defensive end, but wasn't ever a really true defensive end. That's the same thing for Horton. He wasn't a true defensive end until this season. He also went from 200 pounds a senior in high school till 275 this year. He slimmed down to 260, which that's Joey Bosa weight. I can live with Joey 260. I want to say he said if he was 262 at the combine, I think Joey Bosa might have been 262 at the combine too, and gotten up to like 266. To'o is a downhill physical linebacker with a ton of big game experience as a starter at Tennessee and Alabama. And like Noah Sewell, he brings it in the run game, but doesn't always diagnose well in coverage. That's where you hope that D'Amico's influence comes through, because D'Amico's good at teaching that kind of stuff. Cunningham used to frustrate me because Cunningham was athletic as hell, but just did not diagnose well, wouldn't recognize patterns, just didn't anticipate routes. As an inside linebacker, a lot of what you do in coverage is more about cutting off lanes, getting into your spot and zones, and getting eyeballs either on the quarterback, looking for crossers, all that kind of stuff. It's as much a mental exercise as it is a physical one. Now, every now and then they'll ask you to cover a tight end down the seam. And I remember Jay Foreman trying to do that with Dallas Clark and coming back to the huddle. And it might have been the first time Dallas Clark was really exposed to the world. And Jay Foreman, who's a big old school inside linebacker, was like, this we got to change something up. There's no more Tampa 2. No more Tampa 2 against these guys. Not with Jay Foreman himself. We're saying not with Jay Foreman on the field. So B- by PFF. I think with PFF, part of it was the trade for Anderson. A lot of people, especially analytical types, which I get and I understand, aren't going to be super crazy about a trade like that. All right, let's see. So they gave him a B-. This was USA Today. They wisely doused the pre-draft speculation by taking quarterback CJ Stroud, 2nd overall, then made an expensive deal with Arizona to obtain the next selection for Will Anderson, perhaps the best player in this draft. Okay, I like you, USA Today. And an early front runner for 2023 Defensive Rookie of the Year. Just let's pump the brakes a little bit. Juice Scruggs and Tank Dell should earn snaps quickly on a roster where they're there largely for the taking. Keep an eye on To'o, a teammate of Anderson's at Alabama. Despite the cost for the picks, this should be the draft that will be remembered as the point at which Houston officially moved past the specter of former quarterback Deshaun Watson. That's interesting. It does feel, unpleasant things that we've learned to be in denial about that perhaps the rest of the world hasn't. The being better than everybody else scandal of 2017, partly because the being better than everybody else scandal wasn't brought to the forefront or exposed. It's a dirty word, exposed, until 2019 or 2020. So in a lot of ways, that's where we're like, this is old stuff. Where the rest of the world, they had to have their chance to boo us in person and all that. So there's that. I feel like we had moved on beyond that a long time ago. As far as moving on from Deshaun Watson, yeah, I'm way over that. It felt like as soon as we started playing games last year, you still saw the aftershock of it. But once that trade was up, there was lots to be miserable about, but I was over it. So an A from then. let's see. This is Yahoo Sports. Yahoo gave an A-. I'm cherry picking here for positivity. But draft picks, who needs them, man? The Texans left the draft with C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson Jr., giving up their first-round pick in 2024, which was still probably will be. I will not stand for this slander. That 2024 pick, which will probably be quite high, stings, but they have the Browns' first-round pick next year as a buffer. That should matter when talking about the trade up to get Anderson directly after taking Stroud. The thing is, Anderson's talent might warrant it. That's the second time in a row we've seen that. He has been as dominant as college football players come over the last 3 years, and a great fit for Ryan's defense. I do think that also I'm guilty of this. I think I'm a little too critical of Anderson, or maybe too nitpicky, because he wasn't as productive this year as he was the year before. It's not as simple as that teams paid him more attention. I do think that sometimes with those guys like Anderson, honestly, Jadeveon Clowney, there's times where offenses are just going to get rid of the ball more quickly. The game plan is to get rid of the ball more quickly. So by the time those guys really announce themselves with authority, the next year the game plans are to get the ball out a lot quicker. One of you Statly types could go up and look and see time to throw for Arizona or Alabama opponents last year, maybe compared to the year before. But so I'll give him that excuse for now because I'm in a good mood. I feel like I'm a good hippie, like new Aaron Rodgers, all of a sudden Aaron Rodgers is clean cut. He's wearing Jets gear everywhere he goes. He looks like he lost the bags in his eyes, which is either because of those Manhattan plastic surgeons or he just feels good about himself in his situation for the first time in a long time. Sometimes divorce is a good thing, I once heard a person say. Least favorite pick. Oh, this was by USA Today. Juice Scruggs, as they're saying. This was a head scratcher. And again, we gotta be careful. And I'm guilty of this too. It says Scruggs wasn't projected to come off the board until way later than this spot. And it was especially odd with John Michael Schmitz, which I feel is like some weird combination of Jan Michael Vincent and John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. Perhaps the Texans know something everyone else doesn't, and Scruggs turns out to be a stud, but right now it's confusing. I think there's a chance, I don't want to be like Pollyanna here or anything, but there's a really good chance that there are a lot of other teams that felt pretty good about Juice Scruggs, according to some pre-draft chatter about what NFL teams were thinking versus what they were saying publicly. So I was good. I was glad that Brandon H brought that to my attention, that this was stuff this was chatter, dated with a timestamp before the draft. There's a really good chance that Scruggs was going to go, kind of like with Titus Howard. Remember Titus Howard? So many people were talking about Titus Howard potentially being a really good bargain pick at the top of the second round because there's a lot of buzz about him. Well, all right, well, I anticipated Titus Howard. We've already covered this. I get a lot of stuff wrong about this. My premonition that happened to be correct on that one was, and that year I was listening to so many podcasts and reading a bunch of stuff. I kept seeing and hearing about how Titus Howard was going to be a find at the top of the second round. Like, all right, well, that means that somebody probably thinks he's worth taking at the end of the first round. I think likewise with Scruggs, I would not get too hung up in a lot of this. The other thing that somebody had said about one of the other draft picks was that he didn't work out well. It'll come to me kind of the same way Kerry Collins came to me 2 minutes later. It'll come to me who he was talking about.
Why?
Okay, so this is Frank Schwab. I'm just gonna have to argue against him a little bit because now he's gonna talk smack about Will Anderson. But Frank Schwab, who's from Yahoo, which gave them an A-, but he apparently wasn't in charge of that grade.
Earth are the Texans giving up what could be the first overall pick in next year's draft to come back up again?
See, that's double shade, okay? Sure, hypothetically, it could be the number one overall pick, but you've seen how hard it is to actually get that pick. The Colts defenders don't catch interceptions. They're supposed to catch.
Will Anderson, who, look, I like Will Anderson. He had a heck of a college career, but people are split on him. People are talking about him being kind of a low ceiling guy. This isn't exactly Von Miller they came back up to get. Every draft trade chart kills the Texans for this. Kills them. And they gave up way too much.
You saw what Nick said. Nick said you can shove that in so many words, I'm paraphrasing here. Nick said you can shove those draft charts up your ass, and then I'll pull them out through your stomach and set them on fire in front of you with your intestines. Paraphrasing.
I get it. Everybody's going to be throwing flowers at them because that's what we do with draft grades. We're going to say, oh, wow, they got Stroud and Anderson. Of course, you have two good players. No question about it.
Yeah, I love this.
So, and then it goes back to David Carr. We've come full circle, my friends. This is, I don't know if you guys have caught on to my method yet or not, but basically I sit and read and watch all afternoon and take out little snippets. And then I come talk to people about it because I can't wait to talk to Sean because I can't talk to Sean until 12 hours from now. 8 hours from now, 9, whatever the math is on that, 9 hours from now. So if it is the first overall pick, then we busted on Anderson and Stroud. No ifs, ands, or buts. Yeah, if the team is that bad, let's see. Peyton Manning won 2 games his rookie year. They had some really good. They didn't get good on defense. They had some good players along the way. But I like to put the team record on those 2 rookies specifically is a bit much. But I would say that they've got, if the Texans are the worst team in the league next year, after managing to win one too many games this season with the roster they had, and in a lot of ways, I felt like Davis Mills almost might as well have been a rookie because he regressed, perhaps because of Pep Hamilton, but he wasn't as good as he was in his rookie year. Yeah, I would say I'm going to be surprised just because I do think there's a genuine coaching upgrade. A lot of it hinges on Bobby Slowick and just how good Bobby Slowick is. So, oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm going to laugh so hard here hoping the Browns have the first pick. That's the other thing. Okay, regardless of what you think the right thing to do was in trading either our pick or the Browns pick or what have you, there's no moral hazard now like there was last year. Like, I don't feel like we're in a position because the Texans have nothing to gain by being bad. You're not like if in the second half of the season, if there's 5-6 games left, I mean, yes, you can improve your position in the second or third round, but I don't give a damn. You can just keep trying to win football games and you don't have to try to play that game. And then also, you control 1/17 of your destiny because you play the Browns. So you could knock down their draft status a little bit. And you get to more open-throatedly beg for the demise of the Browns and the failure of the Browns. So I'm good with that. The trade out for the Stroud-Anderson combo was only a 24 first and pick 33. Casseri regained the 3rd he lost if you go through all the math. After your trade charts was he did, honestly, I went through, if you haven't seen it today, I went through and I watched his Saturday presser, which I hadn't watched the full thing. I did that thing I do, which you guys love, is I go back through and I edit the audio so you can hear most of the questions by the reporters. And if they can't, then I read them off the transcripts. It makes for a much more informative experience. And he got a little testy when they were talking about Patterson and whether, whether he could play guard. He was kind of like, yeah, played both in college. That was almost it's as testy as I've ever seen Nick. And you could tell like it was at the end of a long, long process. Let's see. The Ohio State guy dropped all the way to the 6th round. Yeah, like they passed up. A lot of people were upset that they didn't take him where like he ended up falling too. If they got rid of the ball early for a whole year because of Anderson, that means he changed everyone's game plan for a whole year. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I hope that didn't come off like that was a negative or anything. That would be a good thing. There was one thing where I really wanted to pump the brakes on when people were citing the Tennessee game as the reason that Anderson couldn't beat bigger offensive, NFL caliber offensive linemen. I felt like it was overstated. I have that reservation about Anderson. I think there's times where he's going to have to learn to, and I think he's capable of being more like Hassan Reddick. Now, Hassan Reddick's smaller than Anderson, but he is a textbook example of a smaller guy taking on an offensive tackle. Reddick just uncoils. Like, it looks like he's a safety hitting a dude over the middle. Like, he gets low and uncoils up into an offensive tackle. Khalil Mack and Von Miller are good at doing that too. But Hassan Reddick, just by necessity, does that. and does a really good job of it. So, that's one of those things where I think Anderson got away with some. I say get away with. You're not forced to play with the same level of refinement in college as you do in the NFL. And that's what guys realize, some of them very, very quickly when they get to the NFL, is like, okay, I gotta play that much lower. I gotta be that much more explosive. I've got to be that much more on point with my technique. But the Tennessee game, a lot of people cited that as like him getting handled and whatnot. He didn't have a good game at all in that game. He really did get absorbed and kind of, he was ineffective in his pass rush by Darnell Wright. But I want to say that at least part of that might have been because they're going against that air raid offense, and Hendon Hooker is very good at getting rid of the ball quickly. So sometimes what defensive line coaches will want you to do in those situations, they'll say, look, they get rid of the ball so fast that we're unlikely, even with a nice clean pass rush, to get a sack. So take as direct a route as you can. And sometimes that's what Will Anderson was doing in that game, but it was foolish. I mean, it wasn't a good plan for him on that day, because he was just being met by a brick wall by Darnell Wright when he would try to bull rush him. I think what D'Amico and the way they're going to use Anderson can do is teach him more how to work the edges of players. And you got this big mountainous human being in front of you, like Darnell Wright or Orlando Pace back in the day, or any of those guys. You got there's a theory. I had a coach named Frank Gant Sr. who was awesome guy. And he used to coach to quarter a man. You quarter the man, like you attack a quarter of a human. So I'm going up against a 350-pound dude. Like, all right, I don't have a good chance of taking on that 360 pounds. But I can take on 90 pounds of it real easy. And you do that by attacking that shoulder, attacking the outside shoulder, attacking the inside shoulder. When you're tackling, you're attacking that lower quadrant of his leg, or the other lower quadrant. You attack that quarter, and that it's like knocking out a keystone on a person. It creates that opportunity either to beat him in a pass rush or to tackle him. And a lot of it with Will Anderson is really just a plan of taking the proper angles. And D'Amico, in wanting to line him up in a wide nine, cocked out, without having to mess around in a 2-point stance a bunch, or changing his alignment all that often. I think Will Anderson is really, really going to be able to take his game to a different level. So I'm excited about that part of it. Texans were aggressive in the first round and had ammo to be aggressive again at the point in the draft to get top-rated center. Had ammo to get aggressive again. So the only thing I'd say, unexpected truth, and I'm not I would say this about any coach at all. These boards are not all universal. There's not, everybody has different ratings on these guys. There are some teams that had Bryce Young ranked lower than CJ Stroud. Not as many, nearly. I think most teams had Bryce Young as the highest, but that's just the way it goes. So, when you can't get too sucked into the mock drafts. You just can't, because now you could argue that their evaluations or their valuations should have been different. That's fine. But it's not as, I think sometimes people criticize the draft strategy by saying well, I can't believe you took this guy when he would have been there two rounds later. You just flat out don't know. You just don't know. Now, over time, the Raiders for a long time would do it so continually and make such a habit of kind of bucking the trends and going against what the conventional wisdom was, that then you can start to get a feel for all right, these guys just don't give a damn, and they're just way out over their skis on that. You might feel that way about Nick. There are times where I think Nick kind of throws the draft charts in the fire, but I just get real, especially at a position like center, I get really dicey about saying, the one guy's clearly the top rated. They might have had a lot of those guys rated pretty evenly. Yeah, what was Whippler ranked? I don't know. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. Whippler's medical didn't come out as expected. Let's see. I see 13 winnable games. Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to, Keener, I thought you were going to say that we were going to win 13. I do. Okay. let's look up the Vegas. I'm going to look up the Vegas over under right now. Let's see if the win totals have changed at all, because I try to be as objective as possible about this. And, Vegas is a good way. Obviously, these change and they're not always the best, but it's objective at least, instead of everybody and their brother who grades their own team's draft as an A. Now, one thing that does happen is when you have a lot of first round, if you have couple high draft picks, and you draft those players, you end up getting A's. The only thing that's holding people back with the Texans is a perceived draft value. All right, here we go. Let's see. I will show you the Vegas win totals right this moment. Okay, so we've got the Texans at 5.5 there. So Texans at 5.5. Who's got them at 6.5? Oh, DraftKings. It's feeling saucy. There's a straddle there, right? Yeah, I don't know how you play. I don't know how you do the straddle or not, but DraftKings has got the Texans at 6.5. Are they overly optimistic on anybody else? DraftKings, they're chalk there, 8.5. DraftKings is way more optimistic on the Texans. Everybody else, they're about the same. But they're at, oh, look at that. What's going on? I got to talk to Sean Pendergast tomorrow morning. Somebody DM Sean right now and tell him that I insist we look at the DraftKings. I'll take a screenshot of it. That's what I do. This is how I do. Our show prep, just to let you know, usually it involves a Google Doc and Sean organizing the Google Doc and me texting Sean things that I want to put in the Google Doc, but that I'll forget to. So I'm going to text him that right now. That'd be brilliant. Awesome. Okay, so DraftKings has one extra. I don't know if stop screen. I don't know if I was looking at optimistically. I think they could win 7, and I'd feel really, really good about it. If you think they can win 7, that means they could easily win 5 or easily win 9. But if they won 7 games, and this seems to be what a lot of you guys are thinking based on polls that I've seen, if they could win 7 games, then there's some progress that's been made. And then obviously CJ Stroud. If CJ Stroud throws a bunch of interceptions, but he throws a bunch of touchdowns alongside it, I'll feel good about that, because I know CJ Stroud's not Jameis Winston. Like, he's not reckless with the football or anything. So I think we'll be good. Hennessy Black says, I still hate that AR-15 went to Indy. The thing I hate about that is the athletic raw quarterback in his rookie season always wins a few games where he just busts out a 80-yard run and there's nothing you can do about it. As we here in Houston know from 2006, right? Yeah, with Vince Young. God, we've gotten old. My God. Center talk. I'll do, you know what, guys? I'll do the center here soon. I'll do a little bit of film and talk about, maybe do the comparison to Schmidt and all that stuff. Take the over. I'll put down a money on the over for sure. Vegas has it at 5.5, except for DraftKings, 6.5. 5 wins in our division. The rookie DraftKings knows ball. J-Rock, the Texans are the only team that they've got one over everybody else. There's unanimity everywhere else, and except the DraftKings. The DraftKings are up. I don't know how you can take advantage of that if somehow the field is going to start changing or not. JJ Stagg had him winning 7. My friend said 9 and 8. The number of rookie quarterbacks they face is the really interesting thing. Okay, the rookie quarterbacks who can win games with their legs or win games with ingenuity. I would say AR-15. I would say Bryce Young, but I also feel like Richardson can giveth as much as he taketh away. So I think that, but you have a chance to just split those games. If there's one game that the Texans play against Carolina, it's really going to come down to earlier or later in the season and exactly how we feel about. Boy, that's a good one right there. Let's see what the over under on Carolina is. And then Will Levis, I feel like Will Levis will lose 2 games easily if the Texans play Will Levis twice. So I'll pull this back up. So we're going to look at the over-unders on some of the Texans' opponents, see if we should be cocky yet. I'll claim victory. I'm going to claim victory right now if we're that much better. All right, total win odds. I'm going to share those with you. You guys got those? Yeah, there you go. Okay, so where's Carolina? Raiders. Jaguars are at, oh, wow. Okay, DraftKings is a little off on, DraftKings is optimistic on the AFC South. DraftKings is at 10.5 for the Jaguars, while everybody else is at 9.5. They're Bears on the Cardinals. They're 4.5. Everybody else is 5.5. They're equal, except, okay, the Commanders, everybody's kind of split on. The Browns are at 9.5. The Giants, we don't play them. Broncos are at 8.5. That's a vote of confidence for Sean Payton. Chargers, Steelers, Panthers, 7.5. So it's 7.5, or the Texans are at 5.5. The rookie quarterbacks, who's going to be better at what point in the season? I'm going to put, I think that CJ Stroud might actually, and this isn't a referendum on exactly how they'll be in their careers. I could see CJ Stroud being better earlier, just by virtue of having a scheme that he's adapted to more quickly and that can rely on the run game. Frank Reich's going to do really good things with their scheme too. I'm not trying to act like, Frank Reich is some chump of a coach or something, but I think that CJ Stroud and CJ's got, this is what CJ has going for him right now in terms of rookie year performance. CJ is much more conventional in terms of his footwork. I think when it comes to taking a 3, a 5, a 7-step drop, getting the ball out on rhythm, you take a 5-step drop, that first step is a read, second step's a read, third step's a read. He's got that. He's got that part of rhythm passing down. He's got to get better under center like all college quarterbacks do now, especially in this system. But it's going to be set up in such a way that his attention to detail and his refined technique is going to help him early on. I think with Bryce, they're going to have to work on some of the things like his drops and some of the way he does things. He's not necessarily on as much of a rhythm. He doesn't get the ball out in rhythm when things are going according to plan the way that CJ Stroud does. The difference with Bryce is that when things break down, he's shown more aptitude at it more consistently. Don't worry. I'm not saying CJ can't do it. I saw the Georgia game. I've seen the other instances where he's done it. It's just that Bryce has had a lot more practice doing it. So as long as things are going according to plan and versus bad teams, I think CJ might have the leg up there. And then after that, it's all just a matter of who develops the most. All right. 7.5 is wishful thinking. Who said that? I thought I clicked on it. 7.5 is wishful thinking. The over-under isn't as 7.5, so I don't know. Oh, 7.5 for Carolina. Is that wishful thinking? That's right. Oh, plus. Okay. Ooh. I don't know if they have over-under on games played yet. Like, I wonder, does Vegas... They're not going to have that yet. Games played futures for NFL quarterbacks, because I wonder how Vegas is going to treat Bryce Young's diminutive size. I'm not seeing this already. And yes, I know big guys get injured too, but just maybe small guys get injured more. I'm not wishing injury upon Bryce Young. I'm just saying that it would be a tidy little way to. If you had, I don't. I want him to suck. I just want him to suck. Okay. I don't want him to. I want him to have to play a certain way because of his size that leads to him not being as effective a quarterback. Because the one big thing, and I know I've told you guys this, I've told the Payne and Pendergast audience this, 6:10 a.m. every weekday morning, 6 to 10 a.m. on 6:10 a.m. But you can listen on the Odyssey app. I think the under-discussed thing about Bryce Young is simply that just like Johnny Manziel or Baker Mayfield, his athleticism and the things that he does to scramble isn't athletic enough for the NFL. And you remember, like Johnny Manziel, even when he was sober, when he was out on a football field in the NFL, there was this moment where you're like, oh, it's not really running away from anybody, is he? And Baker Mayfield wasn't as athletic, but like his escapability, Baker Mayfield's a different story. I think Case Keenum is probably a good example. If Case was improvised like the Dickens in college and could run away from guys and create time outside the pocket, he couldn't do it as effectively in the NFL. So I think that's going to be something to watch. The improvisational ability of Bryce, who wasn't really running away from the bigger, more athletic guys in the SEC when he was scrambling. That's going to be something that's a little bit of a variable. And he obviously, not that any quarterback should take those hits. It's just that's one thing you might need to think about. If you keep Young in the pocket and force him to throw, you are good. That'll be interesting. If you go like the route of other short quarterbacks where you try to keep him in the pocket, the thing with Mike Vick for a long time did something that I don't think he got. I think with Andy Reid, because he's such a good coach, worked on it with Vick. And unfortunately for Vick, he got himself unfortunated. He unfortunated himself. But it was later in his career that he was with Andy Reid. Vick, the whole game plan used to be don't let him roll to his left because he's a lefty, It's kind of like, like Harden. It was like taking away Harden's left. And likewise with Vick, you do the old Harden defense when that was effective versus Harden for a little while. You just get off to one side of him and make him go the other way, and it made him much less effective. Or shorter, smaller quarterbacks try to keep him in the pocket, get in the passing lanes. It'd be interesting. Like, nobody's quite as good at batting passes now as JJ was. And I was thinking about this the other day. I think at least part of that is just the change in schemes, because the NFL offenses are so much more spread out now, in partly because they adopted the college game, but also partly maybe because defensive linemen got so good at getting their hands up in passing lanes that you just got to create more passing lanes and get more guys out on routes. So you don't see like a JJ swat quite as much anymore, but that'll be the big test. Yes, guys in the SEC are tall, but guys in the NFL are taller, wider, and smarter about getting in passing lanes. The defensive linemen that really work at it and study at it and are good at it, like JJ, they haven't necessarily seen anything like that. Let's see. Lamar only gets hurt in the pocket, though the pocket isn't a safe space. Yeah, I guess Lamar got hurt. Well, one of his was running out of bounds, was it not? But it wasn't getting hit. I don't know. Yeah, Lamar, the whole thing about Lamar that I wonder about is just simply cumulative contact, cumulative trauma over time. He's good at not taking big hits, but he's gotten hit more than anybody else on a per snap basis than any other quarterback since whichever year it is for quite some time. So I always worry about the cumulative trauma with him, but I also think that, look, this will be his first time with a non-Greg Roman coordinator who maybe will be able to work with him and not have that offense be centered so much around quarterback run, the threat of quarterback run or designed quarterback runs, that maybe diversifying that offense a little bit more it gets the absolute 100% win playoff games out of Lamar Jackson. Let's see. Oh, JJ coming out of, that's what this is about. JJ coming out of retirement for our playoff run. Okay. JJ just tweeted today that he's going to might be starting a podcast with his brothers or one of the brothers. He hasn't, when I saw him in the videos for the soccer club that he just purchased, what's the name of the soccer club? Brienemy or something. He didn't look as slim as other times I've seen him when he's coming back from injury. You know what though? Oh, he said it was, he's doing some kind of workout that's pretty tough. I told him, hey, like JJ, you don't have to puke after your workouts anymore. That's one of the advice. I told you guys this morning, I'm texting JJ random advice about retirement at times. And some of it useful. But not puking, not feeling like you want to puke after each workout, that's a big one. It takes like 2 years to learn and understand that, like, oh, like every workout doesn't have to feel like you're shooting a Nike commercial. Like every workout is not the thing that's going to determine whether or not you make that extra play in week 17. And after a while, you can actually really start to Burnley. Thank you, Burnley. After a while, you can just start to enjoy your workouts. But I think that every defensive lineman should work half seasons their last couple years in the NFL. I think once you get to the point where you're getting injured a lot, or if you're just in your mid 30s, just stay in shape, go work out at a facility, and like a training facility where they push you enough. You're still in puking mode at this point. And then in November, do what Ndamukong Suh did. You sign with a team that's a contender and either go ring chasing or at the very least a big payday, or both for fun and profit. Texans special teams play could be. That's you know what, Mark? That is an excellent idea. Screenshot, sending that to Mark. That is freaking. I know other people have said that, but Mark, and I'm glad I've said that before, but then I always forget it because I ignore special teams. Yes, in close games, and you might ask, why does DraftKings have the Texans rated? For those of you who just joined us, DraftKings has the Texans at 6.5 wins on the season, where every other sports book that we saw has them at 5.5. Is special teams the difference there? Because Frank Bush and the special teams for the Texans have been very respectable the last couple of years. You get the sense that like Toho, son of a, I'm going to disrespect this guy the first time I see him by pronouncing his name wrong. Toho, and others in this draft class, I think, are going to be really good at special teams. That's one reason you take guys who are captains. When you draft guys in the mid rounds who are team captains, those are guys who are not going to like whine and bitch and complain about how they need to be premier players. That's an expansion era story for you, expansion team nonsense. We had this kid on the team. They cut Troy Evans in training camp. Troy Evans, who is a rookie linebacker out of Cincinnati, he got cut during training camp in favor of this other kid who looked like a bodybuilder, just yoked, could run everything. And yet he'd played in the Canadian League for a couple of years. And the Texans kept him over Troy Evans. They cut Troy. Troy's just an average looking dude, fit and everything, but a linebacker, nothing special about him. Came on he had been with St. Louis for a year at the time, St. Louis. And, but they cut him. And they take this Adonis, this specimen, this just perfectly formed human being who was a backup linebacker who didn't want to play special teams. And his excuse was that I just got to be out there every play, man. I just can't play special teams. Like there's no such thing as a good linebacker who isn't good on special teams. He might not like playing it. Like if you put Ray Lewis out there and said, "Hey, you're going to run down on punt every snap in your 10th season," he was going to hate it, but he'd be awesome at it because that's what linebackers do. It's running in space, it's breaking down, it's tackling. So like they cut this guy, and this is the stuff that coaches and scouts sometimes do that drives you insane. They cut Troy Evans, who ended up getting re-signed midway through the season, would go on to play a long time in the NFL as an awesome special teams player, was the Saints special teams captain the year they won the Super Bowl. Just an awesome guy, but he didn't have all those, those jump off the chart eyeball bulging stats and physique and all of that. So they got guys. I guarantee you that guy that didn't want to play special teams, who was like just trying to make it out of the Canadian League, he probably was not a team captain in college or high school. Or maybe he was, because sometimes it's just the awesome guy. Let's see. Rick said, I believe we thought Bryce was too small from the beginning and wanted Stroud all along. Oh, the Texans. Yeah. Both are accurate passers, but I think the offense is going to be based on accuracy across the middle. I was trying to be honest with myself about that and go back. I got to go back and this is one reason to tweet more, so you just have an honest record for yourself of what you're thinking. I feel like the moment that people thought the Panthers really wanted Stroud, I feel like a lot of people, just like in a masochistic way, thought, oh, yep, we missed out on Stroud. Like maybe you're on the fence, but then once you found out that the Panthers supposedly wanted Stroud, in your mind, you're like, oh, yep, we blew it. They won that last game. We blew it. And you got to remember, it was a month ago. It was a month ago that everybody was certain that the Panthers were going to take the guy they thought was the best quarterback, and it was CJ Stroud. And everybody was cool with it. And then somewhere along the way, over the course of a month, a leaked cognition test that nobody outside the NFL had ever heard about before, and things flipped like that. Boom. It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that, like, maybe a team that might want CJ Stroud to fall to them, maybe a team that had an owner that just says anything he wants out in public, just makes jokes about Will Levis or something, makes jokes about how that kid from Alabama is looking pretty good. Might just be that the Colts liked CJ Stroud and we're trying to get him to fall. I don't know. Oh, God, I hope that's true. I really hope that's true, and I really hope that the Texans destroy the Colts. Oh, by the way, I'm doing a thing tomorrow night at Texas Children's Hospital with Peyton Manning and Eli Manning, where I'm interviewing them on stage. It's a benefit for Texas Children's. I don't think they haven't shown me any tickets available or anything, or have me help promote it. So I think it's sold out very, very quickly. So I will be interviewing those two. I will bring up my career record versus Peyton Manning, which I got to go do a little research, but I want to say it's 1 for something. But I think I beat him once when I was with the Jaguars. But I do want to get some. This is for charity, and this is all about the Mannings and their foundation, and talk about media, all of that. But there was that story that Brady Quinn put out there about CJ Stroud supposedly ghosting the Manning Academy. And I have to find out about this. But I don't know how to ask it. I can't ask it on stage at this fundraiser for the Texas Children's Hospital. I can't have that erupt into some kind of uncomfortable silence where all of a sudden I give Texas Children's Hospital less of an ability to win money on their silent auction or something. But I'll try to figure something out. Okay, on the record, I'll ask them a question and we'll see what they say about it. My guess is that Peyton will say something very interesting and yet not controversial at all when it comes to it. So Peyton Manning should get locked up in Houston the way he treated us. You want me to serve him? I'll serve him. At least one of the 200 people watching right now has got to be a cop. Figure out a way to get me a subpoena or something for Peyton. I'll serve his ass. Let's see. All right, guys. I appreciate it. I'm going to go home and get to bed. Thanks for hanging out. And like this and subscribe. Tell a friend. I know I'm supposed to do this an hour and 21 minutes ago, but I figure if you've stuck around this long, my God, you might as well subscribe. Please. Good day, everybody.